Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today, and boy, do I have a lot to talk about. It's quite an extraordinary time for immigrants, particularly those arriving from Afghanistan that we're really in the heart of, and I'll get to that in a bit. But I thought I'd just start off because I did a little research on your amazing group, and just so impressed with your worldview and how you look at things. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about myself, which is frankly something I don't spend a lot of time doing, but it may be germane to what we're talking about in the larger picture. So my name is Margaret O'Sullivan. I'm the Executive Director of the Nationalities Service Center. I've been with NSC, as we're affectionately called, for since 2014, January of 2014. So I'm coming up on 8 years or so. But really getting back to the very beginning, I'm the children of immigrants. My parents came from the west of Ireland. They were part of the diaspora of the 1950s, where, after home rule and after Irish, the split between the North and the South was formalized. There were no jobs. The economy, it just was a mess. So they came here as economic refugees because they had no choice. They needed jobs. They were from large families. And the idea was that, you'd send a few over to the States or Australia, and they would send money back every month, which, by the way, is what most immigrants do to this day. They come here and they're not only are they supporting themselves, but they're supporting and their families, but they're supporting their mom and dad and brothers and sisters back home, but with the jobs they get in Philadelphia. So my parents came here. My mom had actually studied to be a nun. She moved from Ireland to England and spent 6 years in the convent there, and thought the better of it, and came to the States and met my father, also from Ireland, and they married and had 10 children. I'm the seventh of those 10 children, and my parents did kind of they call it the Irish Immigrant Trail, which is they landed in West Philadelphia, moved to Upper Darby, moved out to Newtown Square, and then out to Westchester. Every immigrant group that we work with has their own trail that a lot of them move together with their compatriots, and it's just a fascinating part of Philadelphia's story. So the seventh of 10, and all of us, my father was a landscaper. We didn't have much money, but we were proud of him and his ability to care for and feed and clothe all those children. But we were raised with the idea that, my father's affectionately referred to it as 18 and out, meaning I know that sounds a little tough, but it was his way of saying, I can support you until you're 18, but you've got to make your way from there. And that provided a clarity for us, and we all figured out a way to get to college and go out in the world and try to do good on earth. I have a brother who works on gender disparity issues with the World Bank in Africa. And I myself spent most of my early career with the Red Cross of Southeastern Pennsylvania as the interim chief executive officer for a bit, but predominantly as the chief program officer. And in that role, I was so blessed to be able to go to places like Bosnia after the war, Romania, Armenia, places that had seen significant seismic impacts of war. In Armenia, it was a horrendous earthquake, and Romania, obviously, it's changing gratefully now, but abject poverty and the inability of that society, that Red Cross society within Romania, to really sustain itself was part of the reason why I was there. And I think at the Red Cross, probably the most memorable experience for me would be the 6 weeks, all told 3 months, being called up to the New York World Trade Center response after September 11th. So there's nothing much in my career that will overtake that particular period of time in my memory. To this day, I can recall it, and it's something that will stay with me forever. After I left the Red Cross, I worked for Bill Clinton's foundation, working on a global greenhouse gas emission climate change effort. I was led to that job because I started to read in disaster relief world, there was this confluence of climate and refugees that the UN was starting to talk more about. And the more I read about climate change, the more terrified I became. And ultimately that job then led me to NSC, which for me is almost a marriage of all of the things that I've cared about wanting to make sure that that immigrants get a decent shot like my family got to if they show up and if they're ready to do what they need to do to make a sustainable pathway for themselves in the United States. NSC is committed to helping them do that. But also recognizing that the ideas that motivated immigration are changing vastly. And, so climate change is on our radar now, as are war, ethnic conflict, untold horrors across the world, which I'll spare you on this Sunday morning. But I've learned through this job in nearly 8 years that no one leaves a home that they loved or a country that they loved unless they absolutely have to. That's, I think, something that people don't understand when they see people walking across countries and borders. I just read an article about a young Syrian girl who was walking across Syria to Turkey, trying to make her way to England to reunite with her mother. I mean, walking across the continent, people don't understand how desperate you have to be to take a journey like that on. So we'll get into a little bit more about the specifics of that, but that's a little bit about who I am and the job that I love and have grown to love here in Philadelphia. So if I could trouble someone to just start with the slides, and we'll just go through. I don't have a lot, but it was a way to just organize things. I'd like to start with this first slide because we're so proud of the bottom half of it. NSC is formally launching its 100th anniversary. We were founded in 1920, formally 22, but we're launching the anniversary year next week. We were founded by women formerly from the YWCA of Philadelphia that were concerned that after World War I, a lot of immigrants were coming into the city and didn't know how to speak English. And they formed kind of a women's collective, ultimately that became part of the International Institute movement, which was part of that similar movements across the country at that time of collectives of women and men who were gathering together to impact social justice issues. So the International Institute of Philadelphia that spun off from the YWCA and ultimately was renamed the Nationalities Service Center in the mid-60s. So what you're seeing in that brown and that orange square with the wonderful little logo there and our name, and then the herringbone print is part of our brand new logo and rebrand for the organization. We're 100 years. We've had logos throughout that time that were just crazy and didn't make any sense. And we put a lot of work into this one. And the logo itself is emblematic of the fabric of the tapestry of the immigrant populations that we serve and their pathway to getting to Philadelphia. So I hope you like our new image. If we can go to the next slide, please. So our mission, we're located at 1216 Arch Street, right near the Reading Terminal, by the way. We welcome and empower immigrants to thrive in our communities and pursue a just future. Our vision is that all immigrants achieve a life of safety and stability, sustainable opportunities, and meaningful community connections. Next, please. So part of this anniversary planning that we've done is we worked with a wonderful group in Philadelphia called J2 Communications. And they put together kind of a very thoughtful and well-considered process for us to gather clients, volunteers, board members, donors, staff, to really figure out what it is that we stand for. Over the years, again, when you run an agency that's 100 years old, you'll go back and you'll find, there's at one point we were doing X, but now we're doing Y. And I was struck by the idea that no one had really figured out a way to express what the true big picture was for what we were trying to accomplish. As a big picture person, that was very important to me. And so J2 and their wonderful staff helped us to put together what they call our NSC's Manifesto, which we're kind of introducing again. I will say you're pretty much the first folks to see even this. We're not formally announcing it until our anniversary and annual meeting next Thursday. So I thought I'd spend my Sunday sharing it with you. I'll just read it if that's okay. Our manifesto. We have witnessed the dream in the hearts of immigrants who seek new lives in America. And with them, we share common ground in our personal stories told of loved ones before us as times of oppression or of new beginnings. So regardless of where we came from or how we arrived, we are tightly woven together. There is much to overcome for those who arrive, securing safety, healing trauma, finding community, and for a century, we have been at their side. Next slide, please. We are their companions, their guides, their advocates, their friends, and we design pathways for stability towards economic mobility. Poverty and racism still push back on immigrants, yet they forge lasting contributions and they strengthen our communities. And we are steadfast and poised for the century ahead to embrace those who need refuge, to stand by those who hold hope, and to prepare those who come to build a new life in America. At Nationalities Service Center, we stand with immigrants. Okay, so that's our manifesto. And before we go to the next slide, I did want to point out that we spent a significant amount of time talking. A lot of this work was starting right after the George Floyd events occurred. We have we have a very incredibly diverse staff from all over the world, from different walks of life and different socioeconomic classes. But we had a very interesting and compelling conversation with our African-American employees about how they were struggling to see themselves in the mission of NSC, because we were spending so much time talking about people that had come from some other place, and the streets paved with gold concepts of immigration, or people fighting to get in. There was no space for people that were enslaved and brought here, essentially humanly trafficked. And we made a point in our manifesto to put language in there that included everyone, regardless of how you came, regardless of how African Americans came to this country, and the horrors and the injustice and the just all out inhumanity surrounding their journey here. They are here. They are part of the immigrant story of the United States in all of its glory and horror. And so at NSC, we believe strongly that we hold a place for all people. And we certainly are cognizant of indigenous people and what happened as immigrants came here and overtook the land. And that's certainly for another talk for another day. But I just wanted to point that out, that our manifesto has figured out a way to bring us all together. And we all feel very good about that. If you could go to the next slide, please. So before I talk about really the major issue that we're dealing with at the moment, which is Afghan evacuee resettlement, I'll just briefly talk about what we do in a given year. NSC has currently 84 employees, which is a lot. We've grown significantly. So those 84 employees work with about 5,000 immigrants a year. This year will be much larger, quite frankly, because of the Afghans. And we do everything from, we resettle refugees from all over the world. The President of the United States sets out every year what's called a presidential determination and decides what countries will accept refugees from and in what numbers. During the Trump administration, those numbers were not very high. the Biden administration has made a recommitment to bringing in folks from places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Burma, Bhutan. We will be seeing some Rohingya. We will be seeing Venezuelans this time for the first time in a long time. Syrians that was a group that was coming in right before the travel ban happened. So we'll be seeing Syrians again. And really groups, so there are groups of people within a particular country, and then there are people that are just tortured for being who they are and who they love. So we do bring in members of the LGBTQI community from all over the world who've gone to an embassy and been able to prove that they're being persecuted for their their sexual orientation, or also there's a program for religious persecution. So essentially, people that come to NSC from all over the world are coming because they're leaving a country they never wanted to leave, and a home they never wanted to leave, and a land they love, because they feel no other choice, and we welcome them. We also have a very strong legal department. We have about 12 immigration law attorneys that work to get folks like those asylum, and help those without status, typically called in the mainstream press undocumented. That's not a term we use, but those without status, trying to help them to gain status along the continuum, and working with deferred children whose parents brought them here as immigrants, and they're trying to, as part of the DACA program, become nationalized citizens. We also have an array of programs for survivors of torture, domestic violence victims, very far-reaching health and wellness program wherein we work with significant trauma, and we're building a youth program, and also a very robust employment readiness program, which includes English instruction. And finally, we provide interpretation and translation services, again, to all told, over typically 5,000 people a year come through our doors. Today, we're focusing on one discrete kind of part of that whole tapestry that I've just laid out for you, which is our resettlement program, and in particular of note, the Afghan evacuee operation that we're currently engaged in. Now, and please stop me if I'm going too long. I'm fine with that. So what you're seeing, you might remember on August 15th, well, prior to August 15th, we all heard rumblings that the Biden administration was saying, we're pulling out of Afghanistan. The Trump administration had made the pledge, and the Biden administration was going through it. Afghanistan's an incredibly complicated country. The more I learn about it, and it's amazing people, but it's complex history, and it's complex governing structures within provinces, within warlords, within all sorts of religious judges that ultimately made up the Taliban. It's a very complicated place. Let me just say that. So when the Biden administration made the decision to leave, for another class, we could talk about whether or not that was the most elegant way to do it. Certainly it wasn't. We saw people running for the airport. We saw people clinging to planes as they were taking off and falling to their death. We saw cargo planes airlifting thousands of people, many of whom had run for their lives because they had either worked with US forces as translators, interpreters, worked at the embassy, took care of their children, taught at pro-democracy schools where women were finally allowed to come in and be taught at levels above 12 years old. So those people that you were seeing predominantly were people who knew that if they stayed, as had happened before, the Taliban, has a death list, they call it. They've kept track of who's done what, and they have a list, and it pretty much was well known. We'd been dealing with that for years because we've resettled special immigrant visa holders from Afghanistan. They've worked very closely with the US military, and Congress gave them their own visa to bring them here because they would be killed if they stayed. And so would their children and their families, by the way. So So that's why Afghanistan is different in the sense that the U.S. occupation there, the confluence of the cultural brokers that Afghans became for the U.S. forces that allowed them to help to create, at least for a period of time, something that approached a democracy. It's all fallen apart now, and the reinforcements and the training and the military that the Biden administration left in place really folded within days. And so here we are. People got on these planes. They were taken to lily pad sites, they're called, all around the world, places like Qatar and bases in Germany, and all, to at least get people vetted and COVID tested and vaccinated and health screened, and trying to figure out a way to figure out who these people were, because many ran with no documents. The U.S. has agreed to bring in between 60 to 75,000 of those folks and put them, which they've done now, on 8 military bases in the United States. The closest base to us is the Fort Dix, which also is called Lakehurst, Dix, and okay, you got me on that one. There are 3 names now. We call it Fort Dix because it was called Fort Dix before, but Fort Dix in New Jersey. So that's the closest one to us. And you've probably been seeing on the news that Afghans have arrived in Philadelphia. There's been a lot of coverage. At one point, the Department of Defense, which managed the portion of the evacuation that actually got people physically in the United States, they ultimately chose Philadelphia as the singular airport for all arrivals. And that's created a lot of press and a lot of goodwill in our community. But that's not exactly related to what we do yet. I'll explain that. So folks arrived, they were taken to those that didn't have status, weren't special immigrant visa holders, held what's called humanitarian parolee status, were taken to these bases. They were, again, vetted again. Some work authorization applications were kind of finished and sent off so that people could figure out how to get jobs sooner. Again, more health care was given, looking at figuring out ways for finding out the best city for them to be sent to. And that's typically a place where they know someone. That's called a US tie. While all this was going on, resettlement agencies like NSC we knew that what was coming, because we were if the DOD was the first part of the cascading consequence chain by handling the evacuation and then turning that over to the bases as people landed in the United States. The resettlement agencies are the kind of the third tier of that. We as an organization agreed to take 500 Afghan evacuees. We originally were only going to take 100, but the US government came back and said, we'll give you more resources, because every single person that arrives at an airport that's coming to NSC has a little bag with their travel documents. And on that bag is Margaret O'Sullivan and my cell phone number. And I take every single one of those bags, those names, and the humans attached to it very seriously in terms of our ability. If we're going to say, yes, we can do 500, we need to be able to do that in an honorable way. We're not going to do that if we can't meet that mark. So we said yes to 500, 200 are already in our care. And we expect an unprecedented 256 to arrive next week. Just by way of context, the largest number of refugees we've ever resettled, in our normal kind of resettlement time is 576 in 12 months. So 256 arriving in 1 week, just to give you context, is a number we would typically do in 6 months. But we're not panicking because the Philadelphia community really, without even a very strong ask from us, passively came forward with over $1 million in donations for direct client care, legal services, and infrastructure. We had 1,000 volunteers step forward, and we're already starting to background check and vet them so that they've already are taking part in things like airport pickups and home setups, and even teaching ESL at the hotels where we're currently housing some of the folks as they arrive and before we can get them placed into apartments and housing. And we had 5,000 packages from in-kind donors. So everything from sheets and towels, pots, pans, tea kettles, which are very important to Afghans. So it's both a story of incredible challenge, but also a challenge we would never dream of even approaching to take on without having already had this community step up in this way and say, and thereby saying, yes, we support what you're doing. We support Afghans. We know they've had a traumatic time, and they fled a despotic regime, and we as Philadelphians want to help them. There are currently 700 members of the Afghan diaspora in Philadelphia, preceding this October 15th fall of Kabul. That number now with NSC and Highest, which is taking in 100, and Catholic Services and Bethany Church World Services, all told, there will be about another 700 resettled in a very short period of time. So that will double the number of Afghans in Philadelphia and make us even more of a hub for Afghan resettlement. Is there another slide? No, there is. Thank you for your interest. I left my contact info. I'm very happy to answer any questions. There wasn't a lot of time today, but I definitely wanted to give you the big picture on Afghan resettlement. The thing I have to say in my parting words that I just want to make clear is, the Afghan people they've been through a lot. And preceding this event, a former colleague of mine, we have 15 Afghan nationals on staff, by the way. So we have a lot of intercultural competence, and the Afghan people are very pragmatic about what they've been through. They've been kicked around, as you know, prior to the Ottoman Empire. They've been kind of the football of Central Asia into European colonization for centuries. As recently as the the Soviet invasion, a colleague of mine told me that when in the period of time that he grew up, he's about 45 now. When he grew up, his mom was a modern young woman in 60s, Kabul. She wore miniskirts, and when he left to come to the United States himself, his mom was forced to wear a burqa. So in his lifetime, he saw his mother forcibly. It's one thing to say that's a choice of yours, but she did it because she was afraid for her life and her family's life. It just gives you a concept of what these people have been through. So that's it. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I believe the questions are for later, if I'm not mistaken, but I appreciate the time so much today.